Albert Richardson had bought and sold companies with a handshake, but the crumpled napkin a waitress slipped him at table 6 contained 6 words that would destroy everything he thought he knew about power. But that moment was still 2 hours away. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story. Because tomorrow, I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now, let's get into the story. At 11:47 a.m. on a sweltering Tuesday in Atlanta, Albert Richardson, worth $2.3 billion according to Forbes, adjusted the ill-fitting baseball cap that kept sliding down his forehead. The polyester uniform shirt clung to his back like a second skin, nothing like the Italian cotton he was accustomed to. He'd been Al from corporate for exactly 18 minutes, and already the disguise felt like wearing someone else's life. What do you think drives someone worth billions to walk among their employees in disguise? Have you ever wondered what your boss would discover if they worked your job for a day? Richardson's barbecue kingdom sprawled before him like a testament to American excess. Red leather booths worn smooth by countless families, neon signs buzzing promises of authentic Southern flavor, and the kind of controlled chaos that made his MBA-trained mind twitch. 23 locations across the Southeast, each one a money printing machine that he'd built from a single food truck 15 years ago. But the quarterly reports were showing cracks. Employee turnover was hemorrhaging money, customer satisfaction scores were slipping, and productivity metrics suggested something was fundamentally broken at the ground level. His board of directors wanted answers, and Albert had learned long ago that the view from the 37th floor rarely revealed the truth. The kitchen's heat hit him like a physical wall as he pushed through the swinging doors. Industrial-sized smokers hummed their ancient song, filling the air with hickory smoke that would cling to his skin for days. Line cooks moved and practiced choreography around steel prep tables, their knives singing against cutting boards in rhythm with the lunch rush approaching. "You must be the new guy from corporate." The voice belonged to Miguel, the kitchen manager whose file Albert had memorized that morning. 5 years with the company, never missed a shift, 2 write-ups for attitude problems, though the specifics were vague in his personnel record. "That's me. Al." The fake name felt strange on his tongue. "Ready to learn." Miguel's laugh carried no humor. "Learn? Man, you corporate types come through here every few months, scribble notes on your little clipboards, then disappear back to your air-conditioned offices. Nothing ever changes." Albert bit back his automatic response, the defensive corporate speak that would have bubbled up in any boardroom. Instead, he nodded and accepted the hairnet Miguel thrust at him. The elastic band pulled at his carefully styled hair, another small indignity that reminded him how far he was from his corner office. The lunch rush arrived like a hurricane. Orders flew from the kitchen on platforms of sizzling cast iron, servers weaving between tables with practiced grace, the cash register's electronic symphony punctuating conversations that blended into white noise. Albert found himself assigned to food running, carrying plates from kitchen to table, a simple task that proved deceptively complex. Table 6 needed extra sauce. Table 12's order was wrong. Table 4 wanted their ribs falling off the bone, and sent them back twice. Each mistake felt magnified under the pressure, every delay rippling through the carefully orchestrated chaos of the lunch rush. That's when he first noticed her. Imani Washington moved through the dining room like water finding its level. Fluid, purposeful, seemingly everywhere at once. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that made the polyester uniform look almost elegant, her natural hair pulled back in a style that was both practical and beautiful. While other servers rushed and stumbled under pressure, she glided, somehow managing to make each customer feel like they were her only priority. Albert watched her handle a table of rowdy construction workers with firm grace, diffusing their increasingly inappropriate comments with a smile that never wavered and words that somehow managed to be both kind and unmistakably final. At the next table, she knelt beside an elderly man dining alone, listening intently as he showed her photos of his grandchildren, her genuine interest transforming his lunch into something approaching joy. But it was the small things that caught Albert's attention with the sharp focus of someone trained to read balance sheets. The way she discreetly paid for a homeless man's coffee when she thought no one was looking. How she slipped extra cornbread to a young mother whose toddler had scattered his meal across the floor. The tired lines around her eyes that spoke of someone who knew exhaustion as an old companion. She's something else, isn't she? Miguel appeared beside him, following his gaze. Best server we've ever had. Customers ask for her by name. How long has she worked here? 3 years. Never called in sick, never been late. Takes every extra shift we can give her. Miguel's voice carried a note of respect that Albert rarely heard his employees use about each other. Got a little girl at home. Diabetes, I think. Real sick. The information hit Albert like a cold splash of reality. He'd spent the morning thinking about efficiency metrics and profit margins, but here was an actual person with real problems, doing whatever it took to take care of her family. When you look at the people serving you in restaurants, what stories do you imagine behind their smiles? The afternoon shift brought a different energy. The lunch rush chaos gave way to steady traffic, families with young children, couples sharing quiet conversations over sweet tea and pulled pork. Albert found himself assigned to table cleanup, a job that offered perfect cover for observation. He watched Imani handle a difficult customer, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit who seemed determined to make her day worse. His complaints started small. The table was sticky, the tea was too sweet, the service too slow. Each grievance delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never worked a service job in his life. Imani apologized for each perceived slight, replaced his tea twice, personally cleaned his table with disinfectant, all while maintaining that same professional smile. But Albert caught the moment when she thought no one was looking. The brief pause by the kitchen door, hand pressed to her forehead, taking a deep breath before squaring her shoulders and returning to the dining room. The man's final insult came when his card was declined, and he blamed her for somehow causing the problem. Albert's hands clenched around the bus tub he was carrying, every instinct screaming at him to intervene. But Imani handled it with the kind of grace that spoke of too much practice, offering to hold his table while he sorted out the payment issue, never once making him feel small despite his attempts to diminish her. When the man finally left, without tipping, of course, Albert approached her station. Rough customer, he offered. Her smile was tired but genuine. They all have bad days sometimes. Can't take it personal. Even when they're clearly taking it out on you? Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise maybe that someone had noticed. Especially then. You never know what someone's carrying, you know? Maybe his card got declined because he's having the worst month of his life. Maybe he's taking it out on me because I'm safe to be angry at. Doesn't make it right, but... She shrugged. We all got burdens. The simple wisdom in her words hit Albert harder than any business school lecture. Here was someone who understood human nature at a level that no amount of corporate training could teach. Someone who chose compassion in a job that offered little reason for it. As the dinner shift approached, Albert noticed Imani checking her phone more frequently. Quick glances that carried a weight of anxiety. She tried to hide it, but he'd spent years reading people's tells in boardrooms and negotiation tables. Something was wrong. The phone call came at 6:23 p.m. Albert was refilling ice bins when he heard her voice from the employee break room, the door slightly ajar. The conversation was one-sided, but he could piece together enough to understand the crisis unfolding. How high? No, don't give her any more until I get there. I know, baby, I know it hurts. Mama's going to fix this, okay? I promise. When she emerged, her composure was perfect except for her hands, which trembled slightly as she tied her apron. She caught his eye and smiled, the same professional smile she'd worn all day, but now he could see the cracks in its foundation. The dinner rush demanded everything from everyone. Orders backed up, temperatures rose, tempers frayed. Through it all, Imani maintained her standard of service, but Albert could see the cost. Every smile required effort now, every interaction a small performance that drained her reserves. During a brief lull, he found himself cleaning the table next to where she was rolling silverware. Her movements were automatic, efficient, but her mind was clearly elsewhere. She kept checking her phone, then stopping herself, then checking again. That's when he realized what he had to do. Albert Richardson had built an empire by reading situations, by understanding when conventional approaches wouldn't work. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with policy changes or efficiency improvements. This was about one person in crisis, and sometimes the most important business decisions were the most human ones. He thought about the note cards in his wallet, The expensive ones with his name embossed in gold, tools of a life where his word could move millions of dollars with a phone call. But that life felt very far away as he watched Imani struggle to maintain her composure while her world was clearly falling apart. The decision crystallized with startling clarity. Albert slipped into the employee break room and found a pen and a piece of paper from the bulletin board. For a moment, he stared at the blank surface, thinking about all the contracts he'd signed, all the deals he'd negotiated, all the words that had made him rich. Then he wrote the simplest, most important message of his career. The piece of paper felt heavier than it should have as Albert folded it into his pocket. Written in his careful handwriting were words that had taken him 30 minutes to craft. I notice you're having a tough day. If you need help with anything, medical bills, time off, whatever, please let me know. Sometimes we all need someone in our corner. Al from corporate. He'd rewritten it 5 times, each draft feeling either too formal or too personal, too presumptuous or too distant. How do you offer help to someone who doesn't know you have the power to change their life? How do you bridge a gap that spans billions of dollars without making it about the money? The evening shift brought its own rhythm. Families with tired children picked at mac and cheese while parents tried to stretch conversations beyond work and bills. Date night couples shared appetizers and tentative smiles. The elderly came early for the senior discount, ordering the same meals they'd been ordering for years, finding comfort in consistency. Albert found himself assigned to table 6, a foretop near the window that caught the late afternoon light streaming through glass already fogged with steam from countless glasses of sweet tea. It was Imani's section, and he'd requested it specifically, though he'd made the request seem casual to Miguel. She moved through her section with the same fluid grace he'd observed all day, but now he could see the micro-expressions that betrayed her growing anxiety. The way she checked her phone during every brief break. How her hands trembled almost imperceptibly when she thought no one was looking. The forced quality of her laugh when customers made small talk. At 7:15, her phone buzzed again. Albert watched her read the message, saw the color drain from her face, watched her steady herself against the wall for just a moment before squaring her shoulders and returning to her tables. Have you ever been in a situation where you desperately needed help but couldn't bring yourself to ask for it? What stopped you? The opportunity came when she approached table 6 to clear the plates from his customers. 2 off-duty employees Miguel had asked to help sell the cover story. Albert had barely touched his pulled pork sandwich, too nervous about what he was planning to do. How was everything tonight, Al? Her voice carried its usual professional warmth, but he could hear the exhaustion underneath. Great, thanks. Listen. He pulled the folded paper from his pocket, heart hammering against his ribs. I couldn't help but notice you seem like you're having a rough day. I wrote something down. Just, if you need to talk or anything. She looked at the paper in his outstretched hand with surprise. In his experience, corporate employees didn't typically offer emotional support to restaurant staff. But after a moment's hesitation, she took it. That's really kind of you, she said quietly. Actually. She glanced around the restaurant, then back at him. Could I ask you something? You work for corporate, right? Albert nodded. Do you know anything about the employee assistance program? Like how it works if it covers? She paused, choosing her words carefully. If it covers emergency situations. The question hit Albert like a physical blow. Here was someone so desperate she was asking a stranger about benefits she probably didn't even qualify for, grasping for any lifeline that might help her daughter. I'm not sure about the specifics, he said truthfully. But I could find out. What kind of emergency? For a moment, he thought she might tell him. Her mouth opened, and he could see her wrestling with how much to reveal. But then another table flagged her down, and the moment passed. Never mind, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thanks for offering, though. I'll read your note on my break. She moved away to handle the other table, and Albert watched her go, feeling like he'd just failed some kind of test he didn't know he was taking. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. The dinner rush peaked and began to ebb, leaving behind the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from serving hundreds of people while carrying personal crisis like a lead weight in your chest. Albert helped with the cleanup, stacking chairs and wiping down tables, all while keeping one eye on Imani. She'd read his note during a brief break, and he'd seen something change in her expression. Not relief exactly, but something softer. Recognition, maybe, that someone had noticed her struggle. It was 8:43 p.m. when everything changed. Albert was refilling the ice machine when he heard the crash, the distinctive sound of dishes hitting the floor. He turned to see Imani standing frozen in the middle of the dining room, her phone in one hand, shattered plates at her feet. Miguel appeared at her side instantly. "Hey, you okay?" She was staring at her phone screen like it contained news of the end of the world. "I have to go," she whispered. "I have to go right now." "Whoa, slow down. What's happening?" "My daughter, she's in the hospital. Her blood sugar, they said if I don't get there." Her voice broke. "I have to go." Miguel's face softened immediately. "Of course. Go. Don't worry about anything here." But Imani didn't move. She stood there, phone clutched in her hand, looking around the restaurant with the expression of someone trapped in a nightmare. "I can't," she said so quietly Albert had to strain to hear her. "I can't leave. I'm already 2 strikes on attendance. If I leave now..." "Imani, this is your daughter. And this is my job. If I lose this job, I can't pay for her insulin. I can't pay for anything." Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice remained steady. "What kind of choice is that? Let my daughter suffer alone, or lose the only way I have to help her?" Albert felt something crack open in his chest. Here was the real cost of his business decisions. The human price of policies written by people who'd never had to choose between their child's health and their livelihood. The restaurant had gone quiet. Other employees had gathered, drawn by the drama, and a few customers were openly staring. Imani seemed to realize she was making a scene, and she quickly knelt to pick up the broken dishes, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the pieces. That's when Albert made a decision that would change everything. He approached her slowly, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "Imani." She looked up at him, tears making tracks down her cheeks. "Go to your daughter," he said quietly. "I'll handle things with corporate. I promise you won't lose your job." She stared at him like he'd just offered to move mountains. "You can't promise that. You don't understand. Corporate doesn't care about us. We're just numbers on a spreadsheet." The accusation stung because it was true, or had been true until about 8 hours ago. "Trust me," he said. "Please. Just go." For a moment, he thought she might refuse. Then Miguel stepped forward. "Go, Imani. Al's right. Your daughter needs you." She stood slowly, still clutching the broken pieces of plate. She looked at Albert, then at Miguel, then around at all the faces watching her. "I need to tell you something first." She walked over to the server station and grabbed a napkin, then wrote something quickly. When she returned, she pressed the napkin into Albert's hand. "Read this after I'm gone," she said. "Please." Before he could respond, she was moving, untying her apron as she walked, calling over her shoulder. "Tell whoever needs to know that I'll be back tomorrow. I'll work double shifts to make up for tonight. I'll do whatever it takes." And then she was gone, pushing through the glass doors into the Atlanta night, leaving Albert standing in the middle of the restaurant with a napkin in his hand and the weight of several dozen stares on his shoulders. "Back to work, everyone," Miguel announced. "Show's over." The restaurant slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but Albert remained frozen, staring at the napkin in his hand. He could feel the weight of words written in hurried pencil, could see the dark smudges where tears had fallen on the paper. With hands that trembled more than he cared to admit, he unfolded the napkin. 6 words, written in the desperate handwriting of a mother watching her world collapse. "Please, sir, my baby is dying." The napkin fluttered to the floor as Albert's legs gave out, sending him stumbling backward against the nearest table. Those 6 words hit him with the force of a physical blow, stripping away every layer of corporate distance he'd built around himself over the years. This wasn't about employee satisfaction scores or productivity metrics. This wasn't about quarterly reports or board meetings or stock prices. This was about a mother begging a stranger to save her child's life, about someone so desperate she was willing to risk everything on the hope that one person might care enough to help. Albert Richardson had spent 15 years building an empire, accumulating power and wealth and influence. He'd thought he understood what power meant, had believed that success was measured in dollars and market share and annual growth. But sitting in his own restaurant, holding a tear-stained napkin containing the most powerful words he'd ever read, he realized he'd never understood power at all. Real power wasn't about what you could buy or control or command. Real power was about what you could do when someone was drowning, when everything they loved hung in the balance, when 6 desperate words were all that stood between a child and catastrophe. Albert pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. His personal assistant's emergency line. "Rebecca. It's Albert. I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it right now." As he spoke, outlining instructions that would have sounded insane to him that morning, Albert Richardson began to understand that sometimes the most important business decisions had nothing to do with business at all. The napkin lay forgotten on the floor, but its 6 words had already begun to rewrite everything he thought he knew about success, about power, and about what it really meant to be human. The phone calls started at 8:47 p.m. and didn't stop until well past midnight. Albert Richardson sat in his BMW in the parking lot of Richardson's Barbecue Kingdom, engine off, watching the last employees lock up through the rain-streaked windshield. In the 3 hours since Imani had pressed that napkin into his hands, he'd mobilized resources that most people couldn't access in a lifetime. Rebecca, his personal assistant, had worked her usual miracles. Children's Healthcare of Atlanta had received an anonymous donation large enough to cover any child's medical needs for years. The hospital's billing department had been contacted by a family friend, who would handle all expenses related to one 8-year-old patient named Zara Washington. The pharmacy had been prepaid for whatever medications might be required. But Albert's hands still shook as he stared at his phone screen, thumb hovering over Imani's contact information that Rebecca had somehow procured. What do you say to someone whose 6 words had just rewritten your understanding of what mattered in life? "Hey, it's Al from corporate. I took care of your daughter's medical bills. Also, I'm actually a billionaire and I own the restaurant where you work." Even in his head, it sounded insane. 23 miles away, in the pediatric ICU of Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, Imani Washington sat beside her daughter's bed and tried to understand what the doctor was telling her. "The good news is we've stabilized her blood sugar," Dr. Martinez was saying, her voice professionally gentle. "But Zara's going to need to stay overnight for observation. Her insulin pump malfunctioned, and without proper monitoring." Imani nodded, though she was only half listening. Her mind was caught in an endless loop of calculations. How many shifts she'd have to pick up to pay for this, whether her insurance would cover the emergency room visit, if she still had a job to go back to after walking out in the middle of dinner rush. "Mrs. Washington?" Dr. Martinez was looking at her with concern. "Are you listening?" "I'm sorry. Yes. Overnight observation. I understand." Imani smoothed her daughter's hair, careful not to disturb the 4-line. "About the billing." "Actually, that's been taken care of." Imani's head snapped up. "What?" "A benefactor contacted the hospital earlier tonight. All of Zara's medical expenses have been covered, including any future treatments she might need." Dr. Martinez smiled. "You have some very generous friends." The words didn't make sense. Imani had no generous friends, certainly none with the kind of money that could make medical bills disappear. Her parents were dead, her ex-husband was 3 states away and 2 years behind on child support, and everyone she knew was fighting the same battle she was. "There must be some mistake," she said slowly. "I don't know anyone who could." But even as she spoke, a memory surfaced. Gentle brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, a folded piece of paper pressed into her palm, words written in careful handwriting that she'd read during her break. "I notice you're having a tough day. If you need help with anything, medical bills, time off, whatever, please let me know. Sometimes we all need someone in our corner." "Did this benefactor give a name?" she asked. Dr. Martinez consulted her tablet. "The donation came through the Richardson Foundation." "Mean anything to you?" "Richardson. Like Richardson's Barbecue Kingdom. Like the company that employed her, that she'd probably just lost her job with when she walked out tonight." Imani's world tilted sideways. Back in the parking lot, Albert was still staring at his phone when it rang. The caller ID showed Miguel's number. Miguel. Everything okay? Man, I don't know what you did tonight, but thank you. Miguel's voice carried a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment. Corporate just called. They're giving Imani a week of paid leave and a guarantee that her job will be here when she gets back. Said something about extenuating circumstances and valuing dedicated employees. In 3 years, I've never seen corporate do anything like that. Albert closed his eyes. Rebecca had been thorough as always. She's a good employee. Deserves some support. Yeah, but since when does corporate care about what employees deserve? Miguel paused. Al, can I ask you something? Who are you, really? Because food runners from corporate don't usually have the kind of pull it takes to make things like this happen. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Albert wasn't ready to face. Just someone who believes people should take care of each other, he said finally. After Miguel hung up, Albert sat in the silence of his car and thought about the man he'd been when he woke up that morning. That man had known exactly who he was. Albert Richardson, CEO and founder of Richardson's Barbecue Kingdom, worth $2.3 billion and growing. That man had understood power as something you accumulated and wielded, success as something you measured in quarterly reports and market share. But that man had never held a napkin with 6 words that could stop time. Please sir, my baby is dying. How many Imanis were there? How many employees across his 23 locations were fighting battles he'd never bothered to learn about? How many mothers were choosing between their children's health and their jobs because policies written in boardrooms never considered that the people implementing them had actual lives? The realization felt like drowning in reverse. Instead of losing air, he was suddenly breathing for the first time in years. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Hospital confirms little girl is stable. Anonymous donation processed. Employee benefits updated per your instructions. Anything else you need tonight? Albert typed back. Get me a meeting with HR first thing tomorrow. We need to talk about our family leave policies. Then he started his car and drove toward the hospital. When was the last time you questioned whether the systems you operate within actually serve the people they're supposed to help? At Children's Healthcare, Imani sat in the dim glow of the bedside lamp and watched her daughter sleep. Zara looked so small in the hospital bed, dwarfed by machines that beeped and hummed their electronic lullabies. But her breathing was steady, her color good, and the doctors had assured Imani that the crisis had passed. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was living in someone else's life. Medical bills that disappeared. Paid leave from a company that had never shown an ounce of compassion. A mysterious benefactor who shared a name with her employer. She pulled out her phone and did something she'd never done before. Googled her boss. The search results made her stomach drop. Albert Richardson, founder and CEO of Richardson's Barbecue Kingdom. Net worth estimated at $2.3 billion. Recent Forbes interview about maintaining company culture while scaling operations. A photo of him in an expensive suit, standing in front of the corporate headquarters she'd never seen. The man in the photo looked nothing like Al from corporate. This man was polished, confident, powerful. The kind of person who lived in a world so different from hers they might as well be different species. But the eyes were the same. Gentle brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The same eyes that had watched her struggle through her shift with what she'd thought was empathy. What she now realized was guilt. Imani's hands trembled as she scrolled through article after article. Richardson's Barbecue Kingdom employee satisfaction scores. Turnover rates in the service industry. A think piece about the growing wealth gap in America that featured Albert Richardson as an example of successful entrepreneurship. Nowhere did she find any mention of employee assistance programs or family leave policies or any concern for the people who made his billions possible. She was still reading when the soft knock came at the door. Mrs. Washington. A voice she recognized but couldn't quite place. Could I come in? Imani looked up to see a man in khakis and a polo shirt, wire-rimmed glasses slightly fogged from the transition between the air-conditioned hospital corridor and the warm room. He'd traded the polyester uniform for civilian clothes, but there was no mistaking those eyes. Al, she said quietly. Then, because she now knew better. Or should I say Mr. Richardson? Albert Richardson, billionaire CEO, stood in the doorway of his employee's daughter's hospital room and looked exactly like what he was. A man completely out of his depth. "May I come in?" he asked again. Imani gestured to the chair beside her, then immediately regretted it. What was the protocol for talking to your secret billionaire boss in your daughter's hospital room? Was there a manual for this situation? Albert sat carefully, his eyes immediately going to Zara. "How is she?" "Stable. The doctors say she'll be fine." Imani's voice was carefully neutral. "Thanks to some very generous benefactor, apparently." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid filling the space between them. Finally, Albert spoke. "I need you to know that this morning, I didn't even know your name." The words hit Imani like a slap. "Excuse me. I came to the restaurant to do undercover research. Employee satisfaction was down, turnover was high, and I wanted to understand why. I thought I'd spend a day seeing how the operation really worked, then go back to my office and write some policy changes." Albert's voice was barely above a whisper. "I thought I was doing due diligence." Imani stared at him. "So this was all just research? My daughter's medical crisis was just data for your next board meeting." "No." Albert turned to face her, and she could see something raw and desperate in his expression. "That's what I thought I was doing. But then I watched you work. I saw how you treated people, how you handled that difficult customer, how you kept going even when you were falling apart inside. And I realized." He trailed off, seeming to struggle with words. "Realized what?" "That I've been running a company for 15 years without ever really seeing the people who make it work." Albert's hands clenched in his lap. "You know how I found out about your daughter's diabetes? Miguel mentioned it in passing like it was common knowledge. 3 years you've been working for me, and I didn't know you had a child. I didn't know you were struggling. I didn't know anything about you except your productivity metrics." The admission hung between them like an indictment. "So what now?" Imani asked. "You throw some money at the problem and go back to your billionaire life? Feel good about yourself for helping the poor single mother." The accusation was harsh, but Albert didn't flinch from it. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I've never been in this situation before." "What situation is that?" Realizing that everything I thought I knew about success was wrong. Outside Zara's hospital room, Atlanta hummed its nightly song, traffic on I-85, the distant sound of sirens, the kind of urban symphony that never quite stopped. Inside, 2 people who'd lived their entire lives in different worlds sat beside a sleeping child and tried to figure out what came next. Albert Richardson had built an empire by always knowing the right answer, by having a plan for every contingency. But sitting in that hospital room, watching his employee, his person, struggle with the implications of his deception, he realized that some problems couldn't be solved with money or power or strategic thinking. Some problems required something he'd forgotten how to do: simply being human. The question was whether it was too late to learn. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, broken only by the soft beeping of Zara's monitors and the distant sounds of the hospital corridor. Albert stared at his hands, at the manicured nails and soft skin that had never known real work, while Imani watched him with the steady gaze of someone who'd learned to read people's true intentions in the cruel arithmetic of survival. "You want to know what's funny?" Imani's voice was quiet but sharp enough to cut glass. "I actually believed you cared." Albert looked up. "I do care." "No, you feel guilty. There's a difference." She leaned back in her chair, exhaustion and disappointment warring in her expression. "You spent one day pretending to be normal people, saw how the other half lives, and now you want to feel better about yourself. So you throw money at the problem, my problem, and think that makes you a good person. That's not. Isn't it?" Imani's eyes flashed. "Let me ask you something, Mr. Richardson. After tonight, after you go back to your mansion and your boardroom and your billions of dollars, what happens to the next Imani? The one whose daughter gets sick tomorrow? The one who has to choose between paying rent and buying groceries? What happens to her?" Albert opened his mouth, then closed it again. He'd been so focused on solving Imani's immediate crisis that he hadn't thought about the larger implications, about all the other employees who might be facing similar struggles right now. Because here's what I think, Imani continued, her voice gaining strength. I think you'll go back to your life. Maybe implement some small policy changes to make yourself feel better. Maybe you'll increase the health insurance contribution by 5% or add a company newsletter with inspirational quotes about valuing our team. And in 6 months, when the quarterly reports show the policy changes are costing too much money, you'll quietly reverse them. Because that's what companies do. That's what rich people do. Each word hit Albert like a physical blow because they carried the weight of truth. How many times had he seen exactly that scenario play out in other companies? How many initiatives had he watched get quietly shelved when they impacted the bottom line? You're right, he said quietly. Imani blinked, clearly not expecting that response. You're absolutely right, Albert continued. That's exactly what I would have done 6 months ago. Hell, that's what I was planning to do this morning. Identify the problem, implement the cheapest solution, move on to the next quarterly goal. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights that sparkled like earthbound stars across Atlanta. Do you know what my net worth was this morning? $2.3 billion. Do you know what it costs to run my personal household for a year? About $800,000. My wine collection is worth more than most people make in their entire careers. Is this supposed to make me feel sorry for you? Albert turned back to her. No. It's supposed to make you understand what I'm realizing right now. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, and I've been fighting my employees over health insurance copays. I've been treating human beings like spreadsheet entries while I collect vintage wines I don't even drink. He moved back to his chair, leaning forward with an intensity that made Imani straighten. You asked what happens to the next Imani. Here's my answer. There won't be a next one. Not if I can help it. Pretty words, Imani said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. But words don't pay medical bills or put food on tables. You're right. So let me be more specific. Albert pulled out his phone. Rebecca. I know it's late, but I need you to set up an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. Yes, emergency. And I need you to get me meetings with the heads of HR, benefits, and operations. I don't care if it's their weekend. This can't wait. He hung up and looked back at Imani. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to walk into that boardroom and announce that Richardson's Barbecue Kingdom is implementing the most comprehensive employee benefits package in the restaurant industry. Full health coverage for employees and their families. Paid family leave. Emergency assistance funds. Tuition reimbursement. Mental health support. Imani stared at him. That would cost millions. Tens of millions, probably. Maybe hundreds of millions over time. Albert's voice was steady, certain in a way it hadn't been all day. My board will think I've lost my mind. My CFO might actually have a heart attack. And you know what? I don't care. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Albert looked at Zara, sleeping peacefully in her hospital bed, then back at Imani. Because this morning I thought power meant being able to buy anything I wanted. Tonight I learned that real power means making sure an 8-year-old girl never has to go without insulin because her mother can't afford it. For the first time since he'd revealed his identity, something shifted in Imani's expression. Not trust exactly, but the beginning of possibility. They'll fight you, she said. The board, the shareholders. They'll say it's not sustainable, that you're being emotional instead of logical. Let them fight. I own 51% of the company. I can make this happen whether they like it or not. And when the stock price drops, when the quarterly reports show lower profits. Albert was quiet for a moment, thinking about 13-year-old Albert Richardson, the kid who'd started his first business selling candy bars at school to help his mother pay the electric bill. That kid had understood something that billionaire Albert had forgotten. That success wasn't measured in what you accumulated, but in how many people you lifted up along the way. Then we'll figure out how to do business differently, he said finally. Maybe we don't need to open 23 new locations this year. Maybe I don't need a fourth vacation home. Maybe success looks different than I thought it did. What would you be willing to sacrifice to ensure no parent ever had to choose between their child's health and keeping their job? The conversation was interrupted by a soft sound from the bed. Zara was stirring, her eyes fluttering open in the dim light. "Mama." Her voice was small and hoarse. Imani was at her side instantly, smoothing her daughter's hair with gentle fingers. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here. Am I okay? I remember feeling really sick." "You're okay now. The doctors fixed you up, and you're going to be just fine." Imani's voice was steady, but Albert could see the tears she was fighting back. Zara's eyes found Albert, studying him with the frank curiosity of childhood. "Who's that man, Mama?" Imani glanced at Albert, and he could see her wrestling with how to explain. How do you tell an 8-year-old that the stranger in the chair is the reason her medical bills disappeared? "That's Mr. Albert," Imani said carefully. "He's a friend." Albert felt something crack open in his chest at the word, friend. After everything he'd put Imani through, the deception, the revelation, the uncomfortable confrontation with his own privilege, she was still willing to extend that small grace. "Are you a doctor?" Zara asked Albert directly. "No, sweetheart. I'm not a doctor." "Then why are you here?" "Mama says only family and doctors are allowed in the hospital rooms." Albert looked at Imani, asking permission with his eyes. She nodded almost imperceptibly. "I'm here because your mama is very brave," Albert said. "She asked for help when you were sick, and I wanted to make sure you were okay." "Mama asks for help?" Zara looked genuinely surprised. "Mama never asks for help. She says we have to take care of ourselves." The simple observation hit both adults like lightning. Albert realized he was seeing the full picture now, not just a struggling employee, but a woman who'd been carrying impossible burdens alone, teaching her daughter that self-reliance was the only option because asking for help had never worked before. "Sometimes even the strongest people need help," Albert told Zara. "And sometimes the right thing to do is to give that help, even when nobody asks for it." Zara considered this with the seriousness that only children could bring to philosophical questions. "Are you going to help other mamas too?" The question, innocent and direct in the way only children's questions could be, stopped Albert cold. Here was the real test of his transformation, posed by an 8-year-old who couldn't possibly understand the weight of what she was asking. "Yes," Albert said, and felt the word reshape something fundamental inside him. "I'm going to try to help all the mamas. And the daddies too. Anyone who needs it." "That's good," Zara said with a satisfied nod. "Mama works really hard. She deserves help." As Zara drifted back to sleep, Albert and Imani sat in renewed silence. But this silence felt different. Not the heavy tension of conflict, but the quiet space where understanding begins to grow. "You really mean it, don't you?" Imani said finally. "About changing everything. I've never meant anything more in my life. It won't be easy. Changing the way business works, the way rich people think about poor people. There's a whole system designed to keep things the way they are." Albert nodded. "I know. But sitting here, watching your daughter sleep safely because we were able to help her, I'm realizing that some fights are worth having even if you might lose." Imani studied his face in the dim light, searching for any hint of the corporate insincerity she'd learned to recognize. Instead, she saw something she'd never expected to find in a billionaire: genuine humility. "I have one condition," she said. "Name it. I want to help. Not just be the poster child for your new policies, but actually help design them. I've been on the receiving end of corporate benefits for years. I know what actually works and what's just window dressing for the annual report." Albert felt a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The first genuine smile he'd had all day. "Are you offering to help me figure out how to be a better boss?" "I'm offering to help you figure out how to be a better human being. The boss part will follow." As they shook hands across Zara's hospital bed, Albert Richardson understood that he was making more than a business agreement. He was entering into a partnership that would require him to question everything he'd ever believed about success, power, and what it meant to build something that truly mattered. The climax wasn't just about saving one child or helping one family. It was about two people from completely different worlds finding common ground in the simple recognition that everyone deserved dignity, security, and the chance to care for the people they loved without having to sacrifice everything else. Outside, Atlanta slept under a blanket of stars, unaware that in one hospital room, a quiet revolution had just begun. 6 months later, Albert Richardson stood at the podium of the Georgia Restaurant Association's annual conference, looking out at an audience of industry leaders who were struggling to understand what they'd just heard. "Let me repeat that," Albert said into the microphone, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of a man who'd found his purpose. In the 6 months since implementing comprehensive employee benefits at Richardson's Barbecue Kingdom, we've seen a 47% increase in employee retention, a 32% boost in customer satisfaction scores, and record-breaking revenue growth. Treating people well isn't just the right thing to do. It's good business. The applause was polite but confused. In the back of the room, Albert spotted Imani Washington, now Director of Employee Relations, taking notes on her tablet. She caught his eye and gave him a small nod, their agreed-upon signal that he was staying on message. The questions from the audience came fast and skeptical. "Mr. Richardson, what's your response to critics who say these policies are unsustainable in the competitive restaurant market?" Albert smiled. "I'd ask them to define sustainability. Is it sustainable to cycle through employees every 6 months, spending tens of thousands on recruitment and training? Is it sustainable to have customers complain about poor service because your staff is overworked and underpaid? We're proving that investing in people creates sustainable success. But at what cost to shareholder value? Our stock price has actually increased 23% since implementation. Turns out investors like companies that aren't hemorrhaging money on turnover and lawsuits." Albert's response drew surprised murmurs from the crowd. After the presentation, Albert found Imani in the hallway, surrounded by restaurant managers eager to understand how her employee assistance program actually worked. "The key is dignity," she was explaining to a group of executives who looked like they'd never considered the concept in a business context. "People don't want handouts. They want to know that when life happens, and life always happens, their employer sees them as human beings, not just productivity units." Albert waited until the crowd dispersed before approaching. "How'd I do up there?" "Better than last month. You only used the word leverage twice." Imani grinned. "Remember when you used to talk about leveraging human capital optimization?" "That was a dark time in my vocabulary," Albert admitted. "Ready for the site visit?" Their next stop was the newest Richardson's Barbecue Kingdom location, but this one was different. Built with input from employees at every level, it featured a childcare center for working parents, a quiet room for breaks and personal calls, and scheduling software that gave workers control over their hours instead of treating them like interchangeable parts. Miguel, now Regional Operations Manager, met them at the entrance. "Boss, you've got to see this," he said, leading them to a bulletin board near the employee break room. The board was covered with thank you notes, photos, and updates from employees across all 23 locations. A photo of Maria from the Birmingham location at her college graduation, her tuition paid through the company's education program. A birth announcement from James in Nashville, whose wife had been able to take paid maternity leave. A drawing from a 6-year-old thanking Mr. Albert for the daycare center that let her mom work without worry. But it was the note in the center that made Albert stop breathing. Written in a child's careful handwriting, "Dear Mr. Albert, thank you for helping my mama help other mamas. Love, Zara." She insisted on writing it herself, Imani said softly. Wanted to practice her cursive. Albert stared at the note, remembering that night in the hospital when Zara had asked if he would help other mamas too. How is she doing? Perfect blood sugar levels for 3 months straight. Her new insulin pump is amazing, and she loves showing it off to her friends. Imani's smile carried a lightness that Albert had never seen during those first difficult months. She wants to be a doctor when she grows up. Says she wants to help kids like Mr. Albert helped her. They spent the rest of the day walking through the restaurant, talking with employees who no longer looked at corporate visits with suspicion and dread. These conversations had become Albert's favorite part of the job, not because they made him feel good about himself, but because they kept him connected to the reality of what work meant to the people who made his business possible. Looking at your own workplace, what changes would make the biggest difference in people's daily lives and long-term security? Carmen, a single father working his way through nursing school, thanked Albert for the flexible scheduling that let him attend classes. Destiny, 19 and supporting her grandmother, showed him the savings account she'd been able to start thanks to the living wage policy. Robert, a veteran struggling with PTSD, explained how the mental health benefits had literally saved his life. Each conversation was a reminder that policy changes weren't just numbers on spreadsheets, they were transformations in real people's lives. "There's something else I want to show you," Imani said as they finished their rounds. She led him to a quiet corner of the restaurant where a simple plaque hung on the wall. "The Imani Washington Award for Employee Excellence," Albert read aloud. "Given monthly to team members who demonstrate exceptional care for customers and colleagues." "I didn't approve this," Albert said, though his tone made it clear he wasn't objecting. "I know." Miguel and the other managers implemented it on their own. They said leadership should come from everywhere, not just the top. Imani's voice carried pride, not in the recognition, but in the culture they'd built together. "That's how you know it's working. When people start taking care of each other without being told to." As they drove back toward corporate headquarters, Albert reflected on how much had changed since that sweltering Tuesday night in August. The policy changes had been the easy part, relatively speaking. His board had grumbled, his CFO had required significant convincing, and a few shareholders had sold their positions. But the numbers didn't lie. Happy employees created happy customers, and happy customers drove sustainable growth. The harder transformation had been personal. Albert Richardson still lived in the same mansion, still drove expensive cars, still had more money than most people could imagine. But he'd also learned to see those possessions differently, not as markers of his worth, but as tools that came with responsibility. The fourth vacation home had been sold, with proceeds funding the childcare centers. The wine collection had been auctioned for the education program. The private jet still existed, but it now spent half its time flying employees and their families to medical appointments they couldn't otherwise afford. "I have a confession," Albert said as they pulled into the corporate parking garage. "Oh no. What now?" "I've been thinking about expanding the model. Not just to other restaurant chains but to other industries entirely. Manufacturing, retail, tech companies. What if we created a certification program for businesses that commit to comprehensive employee support?" Imani was quiet for a moment, considering. That would be huge. Industry-changing huge. Too huge. Probably. Which is exactly why we should do it. She turned to look at him. "You realize you're talking about fundamentally changing how capitalism works in America, right? Making human welfare as important as profit margins." Albert parked the car and sat back, thinking about 8-year-old Zara asking if he would help other mamas. Someone has to start somewhere. "The Richardson Foundation for Workplace Dignity," Imani mused. "I like the sound of that." As they walked toward the elevator, Albert caught sight of his reflection in the polished lobby windows. He looked the same as he had 6 months ago. Same expensive suit, same carefully styled hair, same wire-rimmed glasses. But something fundamental had shifted behind those familiar features. The man in the reflection was still Albert Richardson, billionaire CEO. But he was also Al from corporate, the guy who'd learned that real power wasn't about what you could accumulate. It was about what you could change. The elevator doors closed, carrying them toward the 37th floor where it had all started. But neither of them was the same person who'd occupied these spaces before that night in the hospital. Albert had learned that success without humanity was just sophisticated failure. Imani had learned that some fights were worth having, even against systems that seemed impossible to change. Together, they'd learned that the most important business metric wasn't profit margin or market share. It was how many people went home each night feeling valued, secure, and hopeful about tomorrow. That evening, Albert stopped by Children's Healthcare of Atlanta on his way home. It had become a monthly tradition, visiting the pediatric ward to read stories to kids whose families couldn't afford to miss work to be there during the day. He found Zara in the playroom, teaching origami to a younger boy whose mother worked 2 jobs and could only visit on weekends. At 8 years old, Zara had already internalized the lesson that help flowed in all directions, that receiving kindness meant finding ways to give it back. "Mr. Albert," she called out when she spotted him. "Look what I learned." She held up an intricate paper crane, its wings spread in permanent flight. "That's beautiful, Zara. Did you make it yourself?" "Mama taught me. She says when something beautiful gets broken, you can fold it into something new that's even more beautiful." Albert knelt down beside her, understanding that he was receiving wisdom far beyond her years. "Your mama is a very smart woman." "The smartest," Zara agreed with the absolute certainty of childhood. "She says you're pretty smart too. For a boss." Albert laughed. "High praise coming from you too." As he read stories to a room full of children, some whose parents were working multiple jobs, others whose families had been devastated by medical bills, Albert thought about the note that had started everything. 6 words scribbled on a napkin in desperation. "Please sir, my baby is dying." Those words had shattered his understanding of power and rebuilt it into something more complex, more responsible, more human. They'd taught him that real leadership wasn't about commanding from above. It was about recognizing the dignity in everyone below and creating systems that honored that dignity. Driving home through Atlanta's evening traffic, Albert's phone buzzed with a text from Amani. "Board approved the foundation proposal. We're officially going national. Get ready to change the world." Albert smiled and typed back, "Ready when you are." But he was already changing the world, one policy at a time, one employee at a time, one family at a time. He was proving that businesses could thrive while treating people like human beings instead of production units. He was demonstrating that profit and compassion weren't opposing forces. They were partners in building something sustainable and meaningful. Most importantly, he was teaching other leaders that real power wasn't about what you could take from the world. It was about what you could give back. As Albert Richardson pulled into his driveway, he thought about the 13-year-old boy who'd started his first business to help his mother pay the electric bill. That boy had understood something that billionaire Albert had forgotten and finally remembered. Success wasn't measured in what you accumulated, but in how many people you lifted up along the way. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that businesses could be forces for human flourishing instead of just profit extraction. There would be skeptics to convince, systems to change, and probably more hospital rooms where desperate people needed someone to care. But tonight, Albert Richardson went to sleep knowing that somewhere in Atlanta, a little girl named Zara was safe and healthy because her mother had been brave enough to ask for help, and someone had been ready to give it. And in the morning, he'd wake up ready to make sure that no other parent would ever have to choose between their child's health and their job. No other employee would have to suffer in silence while the people who profited from their work remained willfully blind to their struggles. The note that had stopped him cold 6 months ago was framed on his office wall now, a reminder that the most important messages often came in the smallest packages, from the most unexpected sources. "Please sir, my baby is dying." 6 words that had taught him what power really meant. 6 words that had changed everything.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.